guys, this is Colonial Puppet, and I thought I'd make this video because a lot of people who contact me either over YouTube or Xbox Live are starting to build city maps on Minecraft, and usually they ask for me to come to their world and help them build, and unfortunately I'm usually busy, so I don't get to help out, and I apologize to those people, but I hope you find this video to be helpful. These are some tips that I came up with on building a good Minecraft city map, whether it be on the PC, Xbox, or PlayStation 3. These are kind of universal tips, and before I start listing them, I just want to say that you don't really have to follow these strictly to build a good city map. These are just kind of my personal tips that I use when building my cities on Minecraft, and I'm just going to start right now. The first one is to keep everything to scale with each other. And what I mean by that is to try and keep everything you build on your map, whether it be houses, buildings, roads, what have you, make sure that they are proportionate to each other and don't look out of place when next to each other. And I actually had a problem with this on my first map. I built a giant mansion next to a skyscraper, and the mansion looked out of place because it was obviously to a bigger scale than the skyscraper. Because let's face it, a lot of city maps aren't built to scale to real life, and skyscrapers are usually scaled down. But houses, on the other hand, are smaller, so you can build them to scale. Don't do that. Try and keep, if you scale down your buildings, also scale down your houses. I actually tore down the mansion that I built and built a skyscraper in its place that was to scale with all the other skyscrapers. But that's what I mean by that. Just make sure everything's to scale. And the next one is to pay attention to infrastructure as much as you pay attention to the actual buildings themselves. And I think this one's a really important tip to use, and what I mean by infrastructure is roads, street signs, stuff like that. Just think of what a real city would need in terms of transportation, parking lots. You'll get a much more realistic looking city if you take into account building roads and sidewalks and stuff like that, because anyone can build just a bunch of buildings on plots that are next to each other, but in order to make your city kind of stand out and look more realistic, is definitely to build roads everywhere and make them look realistic and kind of look at your city in a technical standpoint and like kind of a civic planner kind of standpoint, and be like, if there are actual people driving, like, would these roads make sense? Would they need parking anywhere near here? If so, let's build a parking lot. And if you follow that tip, I think your city will look a lot more realistic. And the next tip I have is to be sure to include props with your city, which kind of ties in with the last tip. And by props, I mean street lamps, street lights, stop signs, traffic lights, benches, stuff like that. A good way to make your city look more realistic is to include all of those things on the roads and around the cities, because like I said, anyone can just build a bunch of empty buildings next to each other, but to make it look like an actual city, and definitely include the little stuff. They're just as important as the actual buildings themselves. And the next tip I have is to vary the height of the buildings. A lot of people tend to build buildings that are like around the same height as each other, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're the one building the map, so you know what you want, but I find that when you vary the height of the buildings you build, it tends to look like a more realistic city, because not all cities have really tall buildings. There's usually tall buildings, there's usually lower rise buildings around said tall buildings, and if you really vary the height, it'll look a lot more realistic. And the next tip I have is to be sure to light all the buildings and the roads evenly, and this one's also very important. Spacing out like street lamps, is very important to make the roads look more realistic, because if you just kind of build them willy-nilly, It kind of looks awkward, especially at night when they light up. So definitely space out lamps, and also in buildings, be sure to space out lighting evenly, whether it be torches or glowstone. Um, just make sure that they're equal spaces from each other, and that the building is lit evenly at night so it won't look all awkward when it gets dark. And the next tip I have is to think of it as a real city. And also, I kind of already went over this one, but I thought it would make a good just standalone tip. Um, Not only in terms of roads and parking lots, but also what does a city need? Does it need a hospital? Does it need a police station, fire station, stuff like that? Banks. When you kind of have an idea of what you want a building to be for, like what to be built for, you'll find that building a city is a lot easier, because a lot of people just build no-name empty buildings. I'm guilty of that from time to time, but if you really know why you're building a building, then it'll not only make your city more realistic, but it'll also kind of ease the repetitive process of building a giant city on Minecraft. So yeah, definitely think of what a city would need and then build it to make your city more realistic. Um, and another tip is to vary the building style. And what I mean by this is don't just build a certain style of building. Well, obviously, I just kind of restated the tip. But like when you look at New York, they're not all just modern buildings. They're modern buildings paired in with, older looking Victorian style buildings and 70s kind of harsh architecture buildings. And obviously, you don't really have to follow this tip to heart if you want to build a futuristic looking city that just looks straight up futuristic. But if you want to build like a realistic kind of present day city, I definitely suggest building multiple styles of buildings, Victorian, modern, postmodern, stuff like that. And do research on different types of buildings, definitely, to make your city more realistic. And now for the next tip, and that is to experiment with different shapes. And if you know my city, sometimes I'm guilty of not following this tip. A lot of my buildings are more rectangular, which there are a lot of cities that have rectangular buildings, and like a lot of them, because they're easier to build, definitely. But if you want to have a unique looking city, I definitely suggest experimenting with the shapes of buildings, stuff like that. Make sure that it's not just a bunch of same height, same size rectangles just popping up all over the place. Try and vary, try and make circular buildings, round buildings, kind of buildings with, I don't know, diagonal outside walls instead of just straight up squares. And yeah, that's kind of the end of that tip. And the next tip is to not be afraid to look for inspiration. And this is kind of like a, I guess, moral thing. A lot of people, when they see buildings that look like copied or something, they freak out. It's like, oh, you copied someone else for building. Don't get too worried about, you know, people calling you out for copying buildings. Don't be afraid to look for inspiration. Because, everyone has to learn from somewhere. I personally go onto actual architecture websites to look for my inspiration, but you don't have to. You can look on other people's builds and try and recreate them. That's a way to learn. And don't mistake this with me saying take credit for buildings that other people have made. Don't do that. If you do that, then you, I'm afraid, are a dick. But what I'm trying to say is don't be afraid to kind of learn from other people when trying to build different buildings for your city. And the last tip I have is to be patient. And this one's probably the hardest tip to follow. A lot of people, a lot of people that I know that try and build cities give up after like a week of building. And I guess my tip is to try and be patient if you really want to build a city, because it's going to take some time. I've been building my city on and off for the past year, and I'm still not finished with it, but that's because I do a lot of interior stuff as well. But yeah, like before you start building, definitely ask yourself, am I going to be willing to put up with all the, I guess, just patience that comes with building a giant city map for the Xbox? And if you don't, I mean, there's always like Minecraft Edit and stuff that makes it go faster that I would use if you're building a city on the PC. Unfortunately, if you're doing it for consoles, though, you're kind of out of luck. Although the creative mode, I think, is a lot easier to use on the consoles than on the PC. But yeah, those are pretty much my tips. Like I said, you don't have to follow them exactly. These are really kind of open-ended and up to you to kind of follow. But these are the tips I try and follow when I build my city. I hope you found them useful, and other than that, that's all I have to say. This has been Colonial Puppet. Have a good day.